Before the first whisper of dawn kisses the Bosphorus, when the city still dreams in the deepest dark, silence reigns here. A silence so profound, it breathes. It is within this sacred, shadowed quiet that the true nature of power reveals itself, behind these very walls of Topkapi, where the Sultan's breath cools the very air you now imagine. They speak of daggers, swift and sharp, carving destinies into stone. They whisper of poison, slow and insidious, seeping into the veins of empires. But there was another way, a method born not of rage nor of cowardice, but of an ancient, chilling pragmatism. A way steeped in ritual, in the very fabric of dynasty, a secret passed down through generations of fear and ambition. The silk cord. Imagine it, not a blade drawing blood that would defile the sacred royal chambers. Not a draught, leaving its bitter taste upon the tongue of a prince, an heir. No, just soft, shimmering silk. A silent embrace, devoid of sound, devoid of struggle, as if the very air itself conspired to steal a life. An invisible hand, guided by the cold logic of the throne, tightening around the neck of a rival, a brother, a son. Before the sun has even thought to grace the minarets with its golden touch. This was no common murder, it was an act of terrible, necessary statecraft. This was the ultimate price of absolute power, was it not? The terrible calculus of survival, honed over centuries. To secure the bloodline, to ensure the very existence of the Ottoman Empire, sometimes, one had to sever a branch from the family tree before it could blossom into a threat. This wasn't a story of good versus evil, but of an unforgiving reality. A ruthless game where the stakes were always life and death. A game influenced by the subtle, often lethal, machinations of those closest to the throne. Wives, mothers, who understood that their own destinies were irrevocably tied to the fate of a prince. The burden that settled upon the shoulders of the man destined to rule was heavier than any crown. It was the weight of 1,000 futures, balanced precariously on the edge of a single decision. And the shadow of that decision, that profound silence, clung to every sultan, every queen, every whispered promise within these walls. Betrayal was a currency, traded in the shadowed corridors, a grim necessity to preserve the fragile peace of a vast empire. How much blood, do you think, does it truly take to forge a dynasty? And what echo does that silence leave across the centuries? The very air in these chambers, thick with incense and unspoken dread, held the answer. Look closer, beyond the velvet and the gilt, and you will see it etched into the very stones of this palace. The relentless question of succession. A sultan's life was a precarious dance between divine mandate and mortal ambition. When the old lion breathed his last, who would grasp the reins of this colossal dynasty? The answer, forged in the fires of countless civil wars, was as simple as it was savage. One throne, one undisputed hand. This was the brutal logic behind what history would call Fatih's law. Not merely a decree, but a desperate pact with survival itself. For an empire stretching across 3 continents, a sprawling mosaic of peoples and faiths, division was dissolution. A single, unblemished bloodline was not a luxury. It was the very scaffold upon which the Sultanate stood. Imagine the chaos, the fracturing of power, if every prince, every shahzad born of royal loins were permitted to stake his claim. The realm would bleed itself dry, a feast for opportunistic viziers and plotting pashas. No, the price of unity was paid in kin. Every infant cry from the harem, every new male heir presented to the Sultan was a double-edged prophecy. A blessing for the continuation of the line, yes, but also a seed of potential betrayal. For these boys, these golden birds in gilded cages, were not merely sons, they were rivals, their lives a constant, silent threat to the reigning sultan or to each other. Their existence alone was a challenge. Their world, cloaked in silk and privilege, was a prison of exquisite despair. The laughter in the courtyards, the lessons in statecraft, the innocent games, All were but a veneer over the abyss of uncertainty. And within this luxurious cage, the true game of queens was played, a shadow war fought with whispers and glances. Each mother, each favored concubine, understood the stakes with chilling clarity. Her son's elevation meant her own survival, her future, her power. To fail was to vanish, to be relegated to the forgotten corners of the harem, or worse, to the chill embrace of the Bosphorus. Eunuchs, loyal to a chosen mother, became silent arbiters of fate, their movements unseen, their counsel unheard, yet potent as poison. A strategically placed word, a subtle shift in favor, an alleged slight against a brother, these were the weapons. The air itself grew heavy with ambition, a constant hum of barely suppressed yearning for the throne. You see them, do you not? The young Shahzads, walking through sun-drenched gardens, their faces composed, their eyes betraying nothing. Yet beneath that regal composure, a tempest raged. A brother's illness, a sudden fall from favor, a whispered accusation of disloyalty. Each was a potential death knell. The weight of the dynasty, the sheer enormity of its survival, demanded these sacrifices. The bloodline required blood. And in that chilling equation, the warmth of kinship often turned cold, congealing into a weapon. For when the silence descended and the Sultan's decree was delivered, it was often the silk cord that became the final, undeniable proof of a brother's inherent threat, ensuring that only one son would rise over the Ottoman Empire. The very air within these gilded walls, my dears, was thick with more than incense and perfume. It hummed with unspoken words, with secrets carried on the breath of eunuchs, with the weight of 1,000 eyes always watching. For here, in the heart of the Ottoman Empire, death rarely arrived with the clash of steel or the public cry of the condemned. No, here, death was a whisper, a gesture, a symbol understood only by those who breathed this poisoned air, who lived within this most magnificent yet deadliest of golden cages. How, you might ask, was such a dreadful verdict passed? Was there a grand assembly, a pronouncement echoing through marble halls? Never. The Sultan, isolated by the very majesty of his crown, bore the ultimate burden. Imagine him, alone in chambers vast enough to swallow a man's soul, wrestling with the chilling arithmetic of survival. Not his own necessarily, but that of the bloodline, of the dynasty. 1,000 years of power balanced on the razor's edge of a single, agonizing choice. This was not about bloodlust, understand, but about the crushing, relentless weight of an empire. A man might love his brother, cherish his son, yet the throne demanded a different kind of devotion. A brutal, all-consuming loyalty to the future, even if it meant extinguishing the present. The instruments of fate were often deceptively innocent. Consider the sherbet, a cool, sweet drink, offered on a silver tray by a young, unblemished hand, a simple refreshment on a hot afternoon. But in this world, every drop held potential. Was it merely a thirst quencher, or did it carry the subtle, bitter tang of a swift, silent departure? A single, potent draught, delivered with a smile that masked a terrible truth. The poison, if it was there, worked quickly, silently, leaving no trace but a sudden stillness, a life extinguished with chilling grace. The palace would mourn, of course, but the inner circle would know. They always knew. Or observe the silk, that most luxurious of fabrics, draped over divans, adorning garments. Yet, a simple silk handkerchief, dropped accidentally by a servant, could send a shiver down the spine of a seasoned Grand Vizier. Why? Because the unexpected, the out of place, often spoke volumes in a place where every movement was choreographed, every object purposeful. Was that a prearranged signal? A sign of disfavor, of an approaching storm? A small, soft square of fabric falling to the polished floor could be the first tremor of an earthquake, signifying that the Sultan's patience had worn thin, that a prince's shadow was about to lengthen, then vanish entirely. The silence that followed such an incident was deafening, laden with impending doom. And then, the seal. the Sultan's personal seal, emblazoned on every edict, every decree, a promise of immutable law. Yet, what if that seal, once proudly affixed to a document granting a prince a governorship, or a title, or a reprieve, were to be found not merely broken, but shattered, its waxed fragments scattered, the once sacred impression obliterated? This was more than a revocation, it was an annulment, a promise unmade, a future erased. It spoke of a decision not merely reconsidered, but violently undone, signaling that the prince in question was no longer merely out of favor, but utterly beyond redemption. The message was clear, chillingly precise. The Sultan had spoken, and his word, even in its unmaking, was final. These were the subtle languages of power, my friends, the grim vocabulary of a dynasty that understood one brutal truth. To survive, it must sometimes consume its own. A drop, a fall, a fracture. Small, almost imperceptible details, yet each a harbinger of the inevitable. A shadow, dark and cold, cast not by a passing cloud, but by the very crown itself, eternally hovering over the head of every prince. A constant reminder that in this golden cage, loyalty was paramount, and ambition, left unchecked, often led to the deepest silence of all. The heavy door swung shut, not with a bang, but with a soft, final thud that seemed to swallow all sound. It was then the silence descended. Not the gentle quiet of night, but a living, breathing thing, thick, suffocating, pressing down upon the very stone of the palace. The muffled footsteps of the men of shadow, their grim task completed, receded into the labyrinthine corridors, leaving only a void where life had just been. Tell me, have you ever felt a silence so profound it screams? A silence that is not an absence, but a terrible presence. This was it. The air in the chamber, moments before charged with desperate pleas and the ghost of a brother's breath, now lay still, heavy with the weight of what had just transpired. A life extinguished, a heart undone. The finality of it hung like a shroud. The Sultan remained, a solitary figure amidst the opulent tapestry of his power. His face, carved from marble, betrayed nothing. No tears, no tremor. Yet, look closer, beyond the stern facade. Can you not see the untold burden pressing upon those shoulders, weighed down by the jewels and the crown? This was the cost of empire, the dreadful price of a bloodline's unbroken reign, etched into the stillness of his gaze. Every climb to power, every consolidation, demanded a sacrifice. And this was the ultimate one, made in the name of a dynasty's survival. He stood alone in the empty room, a space now colder, larger, stripped bare of human warmth. The intricate patterns of the rugs, the gleam of the gilded furniture, all seemed to mock the stark reality. The air, once vibrant with the breath of two princes, now held only the lingering chill of fate and the phantom echo of a struggle. This desolate quiet was his sole witness, his silent confessor. It spoke not of triumph, but of a terrible, unavoidable necessity. For the dynasty to endure, for the Sultanate to stand firm against the insidious tides of betrayal, ambition, and the relentless game of queens that brewed in the harem's depths, such grim acts were deemed indispensable. Was he a monster, this man who ordered the extinguishing of his own kin? Or merely a ruler, crushed by the very crown he wore, forced to make choices no man should? In this gilded cage, surrounded by the echoes of his own unforgiving choice, the Sultan was the most solitary soul in the vastness of his empire. The silence, a mute scream of conscience, would cling to him, a permanent shadow woven into the very fabric of his reign. It was the legacy of the silk cord, paid for with a life, sealed by an unbearable stillness that promised no peace. And what, pray tell, remained when the final breath had been drawn, when the hurried shovels covered the fresh earth? The dynasty, unbroken, immutable, Yet, at what cost, my dear ladies? At what unbearable, soul-shattering price? Every sultan, as the weight of the crown settled upon his brow, knew the profound silence that followed the deed, knew that his own hands, now holding the scepter, were forever stained with the blood of kin. This was no choice, not truly. It was a curse, ancient and cold, threaded through the very bloodline, from the first great sultan to the last. A terrible inheritance passed down through generations. The game of queens, you see, it never truly ended. It merely changed players. Their whispers still echo, their shadows still cling to these magnificent, cruel walls. This brutal tradition, this ceaseless demand, it did more than simply shape an empire. It carved the very souls of its rulers. Look into their eyes, if you dare. Do you see the glory they sought, or the haunting ghosts of those they sacrificed? Power, my friends, is no glittering privilege. It is a crushing burden, demanding unthinkable decisions made in the suffocating quiet of the night, all for the preservation of everything that was built, everything that was promised. The silk cord, then, was never just an instrument. It was a symbol. A chilling whisper of finality, woven into the very fabric of their history. The eternal, ruthless circle of power. A legacy of blood passed down through the ages, here, in the heart of this indomitable, shadowed empire.